The subject of this video was voted on by my very first Patreon poll, and if you would like to influence my future content, you already know what to do, so I'm not going to say it. With that out of the way, let's talk all about Aphex Twin. Aphex Twin is the most commonly used pseudonym of Richard D. James. Among the others, we have AFX, Caustic Window, Polygon Window, The Tuss, Dice Man, Power Pill. You get the idea. He is a man of many names and legends whose work has influenced and continues to influence artists today with his contributions to the field of electronic and experimental music. Today I'm going to go through his studio albums and say something about each of them. Let's get in there. Now, I don't have a massive vinyl collection, but I do have this. And it is one of my most treasured possessions. Despite ambient being in the title, this isn't the kind of record you would throw on to meditate to in yoga class. This is the kind of chill-out techno that Michael Caine listens to while he's waiting for Christopher Nolan to put him in another movie.
This is strawberry cough.
The opening track, X-Doll, begins with hissing hi-hats and an encompassing kick drum that surrounds you, while a serene female voice murmurs in and out. This blend of mysterious and evocative tones persists throughout the album, making it the perfect opening track. You might hear my landlord shoveling outside. No? Okay, never mind. Green Calx, that's a word you want to remember, starts with a roaring rush of noise before dropping into an acid funk land of bass. A lot of bass grooves on this album are downright funky and actually kind of danceable. Whether they're used more subtly, such as on the track Aja Palapolis, very ethereal, spacey track, or more prominent on other tracks. The bass is the MVP of this album. Green Calx also features samples from the sci-fi gore fest RoboCop, which I'm a big fan of that. It's not the only track here to have a sample from a movie. We Are the Music Makers takes its name from the Willy Wonka quote it samples. Richard D. James makes Gene Wilder sound like a mischievous god whispering into your ear at the dead of night. This gives you a hint at Richard's sense of humor, which has always been perverse and very strange. Here on this album, it's more subdued, so it fits within everything. I truly recommend this album to anyone who isn't familiar with Aphex Twin. It's a really good place to start. I sort of hate saying this one might be my favorite because it's like the first one, but it just might. It just might. Because I keep coming back to it time and time again, and it never disappoints me. This album features a massive collection of tracks that ranges in moods from the ultra serene to the ultra surreal. Compared to the previous ambient album, this one doesn't rely on beats. There are a few tracks with percussion, but much like the melodies, it remains unvaried and stuck in its place. I like to think of these songs as sound paintings because they invoke very cinematic, expansive visions in my head while I listen to them. And it has this effect not only on myself, but like just about everyone else who listens to it. Now, it's going to be tricky talking about the track names on this one, not because of pronunciation, although that is a thing, but because on Spotify, they are numbered as they're intended to be. But I've known these tracks by the titles that were fan interpretations of blurry photographs that came with the album. I'm just going to say both. Rhubarb, or number 3, is the kind of song I want to hear when I awake in the afterlife, if there is such a blessed thing. The timbre on the synth tones remind me of something out of Brian Eno's discrete music. I could not have gone any longer without bringing up Brian Eno's name, especially when the word ambient is involved. It's a very high compliment. Blue Clouds /13, there's that word again, is another track that I want to mention. It features reverb-drenched synth tones, much like Rhubarb, but has an endlessly clicking metronome in the background that makes me think of the crawling passage of time. This kind of music provokes deep contemplation. Just look at the comment section for any of the songs on the YouTube. I swear, some of y'all should be writing books and not comments. As I mentioned earlier, not all tracks are here to give you peace. Some of them paint a darker picture. Tracks that are unnerving enough to be in a David Lynch movie. We have songs like 15 or Shiny Metal Rods that has this very glitched out, snappy percussion. I didn't think it would be possible to make a track both ambient and industrial, but Richard makes it work. There's also Curtains/7 that has a very bewitching melody with sparse chiming xylophone-esque bells that makes me feel like I'm being followed in a pack of spooky woods. With 24 tracks in total, not all tracks really hold my attention. However, if one doesn't do it for me, there's plenty of others that will. To sum up this album, the TLDR, it does a lot with a little, and it's fucking beautiful. This album puts me into a trance. The songs sprawl for a lengthy period of time, often over the 5-minute mark, and feature hypnotic rhythms that have a thunky realness to them. There's a certain heft in the metallic clicks, clangs, and clunks present in this album that wasn't there or felt in the albums previous to it. Meanwhile, the flowing, sleek synthesizers are often at odds with the percussions. This is especially apparent on the second track, the Waxeth Pithith. I think I got that right. Here, a bubbling synthesizer bounces along a groovy bass line while an orchestra is off doing its own thing. It sounds like two different songs are being played together at the same time. Intentionally clashing elements is something that Richard does very well and especially meditates on this album. One song I really have to talk about is Ventolin. Perhaps one of the worst songs you could ever listen to on a hangover. It's like having a dentist drill in one ear and an industrial trip-hop beat in the other, and they're just screaming, smashing your head into a fine paste. The persistent high-pitched ringing present throughout the track is meant to recreate tinnitus that is caused by asthma medication, where the track derives its name from. I do enjoy this track, but it's something I gotta be in the mood for. You know? Putting this album on shuffle gives me anxiety. In fact, this whole album gives me anxiety, but in a good way because it has some sick beats. Alberto Balazam is perhaps the most popular track off this album. It truly is the standout. It has a perfect blend of ethereal synths, catchy rhythms, and a delicious bass line. Arguably, it's a perfect song. I also want to mention the last track on the album, Next Heap With. It starts off with a shadowy organ that bleeds out along with sharp violin strikes, and then ghostly horns begin to blare and slowly drone on longer and longer, like soldiers invading from an enemy army creeping closer and closer. It's a real perfect way to end everything. It leaves the listener transfixed and anxious for what happens next. It's also very menacing, and menacing is a word I would use a lot for this album. Menacing, ominous, haunting. But overall, it's dark but not too heavy, light but not artificial. It's interesting to hear how Richard balances these contrasting elements to create a compelling listening experience. This album is much shorter than the previous one, clocking in at only half an hour, but what a half an hour it is. It's damn near perfect as each track invites multiple listens with a very good pair of headphones to catch all the quirks and details that just fly right by ya. However, just like the previous one, Richard balances different elements that intentionally clash to create something compelling. Here we have very tranquil orchestral melodies paired with rapid-fire drum and bass beats. Exemplified in the opening track 4, the rhythm section completely outruns the quaint string melody.
My name's Heather, and my anti-drug is my future.
Then the next 2 tracks take a harsher turn with sounds reminiscent more of acid house with these wobbly synthesizers and crackling glitch beats that sounds like someone signing up for AOL.com. Finger Bib is perhaps my favorite song of all fucking time. I mean that. Something about it just stirs my very soul. I don't know what it is, but my soul is stirred. Thoroughly stirred. It's a lively, buzzy ballad that captures childlike playfulness with a warm-hearted melody. I'm not sure if this is the first time Richard has used his voice on a track, but it's been processed to sound like a child singing what sounds like a nursery rhyme, one of those nursery rhymes that's just embedded into your brain from birth. It reminds me of head, shoulders, knees, and toes. It's not quite that, but it has that familiarity about it. It gives me the feeling of being nostalgic for a childhood that I've never lived, and I feel like that idea, that theme, is very integral to this album. Girl Boy Song is a masterpiece fusion of drum and bass with classical instrumentation. The beat perfectly keeps up with the luscious string melody while outdoing it to be the star of the show. It only pauses for a brief moment before it frantically crashes back in and just Love this song. Logan Rock Witch is the last track, which is worth mentioning as well because it's perhaps Richard's most whimsical song. With slide whistles, springs, and wood-like percussions. It's like a child's toy chest come to life, along with this little churchy organ. It makes me feel like I'm a frog in a magical swamp, and that's quite a feeling. It's songs like this, and I've mentioned this before, that conjure up thoughts of childhood and nostalgia, but it's through a very warped and distorted lens. While not present throughout all the tracks, it has an undeniable presence. Also worth noting, the Girl Boys EP features a picture of the alleged grave of his twin brother, which has been said to be the origin of his pseudonym. Whether this is true or not is anyone's guess, but it fits in line with the themes being portrayed in this album as an ode to a childhood that has never been lived. Jerkus is perhaps the most contentious, divisive album amongst the cult fan base of Richard D. James. We've learned to expect the unexpected with Richard before, as he was always like 20 paces ahead of us, zigging while we're zagging, but I wasn't expecting piano pieces prettier than pictures of my friend's cat. And yes, that was just an excuse to show some cat pictures. Listening to the album's 30 tracks consecutively is a jarring experience, as it's constantly flipping between soft piano pieces inspired by John Cage and Eric Satie to intricately programmed, pulse-pounding, glitch IDM. IDM, by the way, stands for Intelligent Dance Music, and yes, it is as absolutely pretentious as it sounds. If you know a better term or word for it, please drop it in the comments, but there just doesn't seem to be a better one yet, because a lot of people use it still, even though they hate it. Blech. However, the more I listen to the album through and through, I feel like the volatile nature of the tracks is intentional. Each track concludes with a long pause of silence, which allows the listener to regroup before the next track storms in and does something else. And yes, among these tracks is Richard's most popular song, April 14th. This song has been featured in movies and ripped off by Kanye West. While it's not my favorite ballad, I can see why it does resonate with a lot of people. It's wistful, melancholic, beautiful. Another well-known track off this album is Aphex 237V7. I think I got that right. Catchy title. It was used in Chris Cunningham's short film Rubber Johnny, which I remember being sort of viral when I was a teenager because of its creepy nature. The song itself is one of the rapid pace drill and bass tracks that makes up the other half of the album's aesthetic. It's like a sci-fi horror movie with a banging beat, so it totally fits the aesthetic of Chris Cunningham's short movie. The album concludes with one final piano ballad called Nano 2 that races at the whirling speed of a glacier. It's the perfect conclusion to this album because after the assault on the senses with all this abrasive flurry, this track gives you peace and time to rest. Overall, the weakest aspect of this album is that the shorter tracks come off as B-sides, D-sides, whatever sides from other albums. This gives the album a hit or miss quality with its tracks, but overall, it is still very much worth listening to. 13 years after Dirk Hughes, Richard has rose from his slumber to release Cyro. And during these 13 years, there has been a lot of changes in the world of electronic music. So it's not surprising to say that this release isn't exactly groundbreaking. The rest of the world has caught up to Richard while he was busy riding his tank. I don't know what the fuck he does in England. This album overall has a lack of aesthetic, but that is the aesthetic. You have everything from ambient techno, funky electro, and a nice little piano tune at the end. It features every trick Richard has used in his discography up to this point. While none of these tracks are particularly innovative as a true stand, I was happy to hear anything new from him. In my opinion, the following Collapse EP is a lot better, a lot more innovative, but let the record show that yes, I do enjoy some songs off this album. Thank you very much. My favorite track is Papate 4, or however you say it. It's poppy, you have a tremolo synthesizer that bounces along a busy beat with crackling snares and hi-hats. It's a really fun song to listen to. I also want to talk about the closing piano song that I mentioned earlier, Azastasia, which is dedicated to his wife and would be right at home amongst the other songs on Dirk Hughes. The melody moves at a stop-and-go rhythm, leaving in short spaces to be filled in with bird songs. It's very pretty. Now, despite being very mean to this album, like I didn't expect that I would be, this is an album that I would recommend to newcomers because you get a buffet sampling of what Richard has to offer before you get into the deep dive. And so that's all the studio albums of Aphex Twin. Now he has plenty of other EPs, D-sides, C-sides, Z-sides, whatever the fuck else out there too. I hope you liked this video. If you did, there's some other ones you can click on around here. If you didn't, well, I'm just sorry. I'm sorry. Otherwise, comment, rate, subscribe, all that jazz. You know, I got my Patreon, got my Insta. Special shout out to executive producer Bill Radovich. Always been a very good guy. And another special shout out to James O'Dent, my favorite cowboy in the wild, wild west. Hope you're doing well, James. I know you live in Texas. Johnny, bye-bye.